It's been a solid 3-ish weeks since players have gotten access to the public test realm. Over the last few weeks, we have been able to test most of the raid on various difficulties, and now we have been able to play through all of the mythic dungeons for better or for worse. We've seen multiple new builds with various class tuning. While there is a bunch to talk about, I want to dedicate this quick little video to updating you on the state of the tanks, specifically in Mythic Plus. A few quick notes though before I start. I haven't done much of the raid testing, and I really don't plan on diving into the upcoming testing either. I'm a Mythic Plus player at heart, and everything I want to talk about in this video will have Mythic Plus at the forefront of any thought and opinion. Also, I've done little, and I mean very little, Guardian Druid testing up to this point on the PTR, so my opinions may be and will be limited. With that out of the way, let's take a walk. Starting with my personal favorite, Brewmaster Monk has received little to no changes. Our elusive brawler stat is just too strong because we keep dodging all of these development notes. But somewhere in an alternate timeline, Brewmaster has finally seen some mention. So basically, to summarize in one sentence, basically instead of having to purify up to 10 chi stacks, you'll now only have to purify up to 6, and each stack is 75% stronger, totaling for an actual 5% Celestial Brew buff. When I first read this, I wasn't all too thrilled because it seems to directly impact the lower end of play, benefiting players who find themselves in Green Stagger the majority of the time instead of players who are often in Deep Stagger. Essentially, in Green Stagger, you only need to purify 6 times instead of 10 to have a max shield. In Yellow Stagger, that number is cut in half down to 3, and if you find yourself in Deep Stagger, you only need to purify twice. Instead of being blocked by chi stacks for high healing, you are now only being gated by the cooldown of Celestial Brew, which can be played around through various cooldown methods or talents. This is a slight indirect buff to things like Black Ox Brew along with Blackout Combo. Not to mention that light brewing will now also offer more defensive benefits since you can dump your chi stacks more frequently. The main reason for this now is because when you're constantly in Deep Stagger, you'll be at 6 stacks of Purified Chi almost immediately after pressing Celestial Brew. Light brewing will allow you to cast Celestial Brew more often. And now with the Blackout Combo talents, if you do Blackout Kick into a Celestial Brew at low stacks, you could be basically at really low chi and still have a maxed shield since the talent remains unaffected. In the highest end of play, this is going to see the most use when you accidentally or unintentionally drop Purified Chi stacks between pulls. Sometimes it's difficult to get from one pack to another depending on the dungeon layout. This helps bridge the gap between building up big chi early in a difficult pull. Overall, it's a really good change. I'd personally like to see some more changes since we still have a ton of problematic talents in our spec tree, but that's okay. Baby steps, I guess. Monk, in terms of performance, is actually just doing fine. It's doing okay healing and damage, and the playstyle is remaining mostly consistent. The tier set does throw a slight wrench in the mix by forcing Blackout Kick spam when the tier set does proc, but outside of that, we're vibing. Also, the Ox buffs are meaningless unless they make it interact with Call to Arms. Until then, not worth taking. Protection Warrior has also seen the most changes since PTR was announced. Going into next patch, Blizzard clearly stated their design goals, which were further doubled down on in a recent blue post. Basically, Blizzard doesn't want the class to feel very button spammy because of excess rage. They don't like that the counterplay to that is spam ignore pain and shield block, which is funny because this new playstyle for warriors still exists in the same universe as Protection Paladin and Guardian Druid. I will say that after my initial testing, I did have mixed feelings. In AoE, I had plenty of rage to spend to keep myself alive and healthy, and having more targets contributed to more resets on Shield Slam, which actually kept the playstyle feeling pretty consistent with how it does on live. But single target encounters felt extremely slow and starved. After the first few weeks, Blizzard did come back and they very softly bumped up the rage generation on a handful of talents. Kinda. Blood Surge and Instigate in the Spec tree and Practice Strike in the Colossus tree had sizable rage buffs. Now, there was a bug with Blood Surge not actually proccing as intended, so that was changed actually even more recently. But honestly, out of these changes, the only thing that really mattered was Practice Strikes for those playing Colossus. The rest of the damage buffs were also just welcomed. I didn't get to test Warrior out in the second week of testing just due to real life obligations, but during last week, I've been able to test this tank basically non-stop because it's kind of fun. Single target rage generation is still rough at times, but the tank does feel extremely stable outside of that. Having Shield Wall with the tier set procs along with Last Stand and Spell Reflect make for a very, very stable tank and an enjoyable gameplay loop. Oh, and I forgot to mention that they also saw some pretty significant tier set buffs, which also helps out big time. Blizzard doubling down on how they feel about Warrior gameplay has me concerned because the more I play it, the more I just want them to revert the changes to Shield Slam procs. These come from two sources including Devastator and Strategist talents. These nerfs definitely slow down the playstyle because the difference between 20 and 30 are pretty staggering. I think that the rage nerfs actually have felt pretty okay now after testing, especially since they buff the amount of ignore pain shield that you're actually going to get per cast. Even more recently, Blizzard has further buffed their damage through execute and made some good adjustments to Frothing Berserker and Barbaric Training, which has helped out their rage economy pretty well. Just to speed up the single target cadence to avoid dead globals, this class is going to actually feel quite strong. All this would be is a reversion or adjustment to Strategist. That's it. Blizzard, please. I would even dare to say that it's looking as a strong contender in Season 2 of The War Within. As expected, Blizzard hates fun. The Demon Hunter tier set has been updated and does not proc Demon Surge damage anymore, so it now feels so much weaker when playing Felskard. You'll still see significant uptime on meta, which is great, but I do think that this is easily one of the worst tier set bonuses. Meta for 4 seconds doesn't really interact with either tree anymore, and the hunt is extremely difficult to use inside of Mythic Plus content, at least high Mythic Plus content. While Reaver's Glaive can still deal some nasty AoE damage, I'm just not impressed with the class right now. Ever since it got nerfed, or I guess the correction to the tier set, I haven't really tested it too much. At the start of the testing, Demon Hunter was eating real good with their bug tier set and increased uptime to demon spikes, but in the last 2 weeks of development notes, Vengeance has almost been completely avoided, meaning that there isn't really anything else to say. As of now, we wait for future weeks. Quick editor note, we did see some buffs to Sigil of Flame and Immolation Aura along with Demon Surge, so take that as you will. If I were to suggest anything, I would like to potentially see a reworked tier set, or at least the 4 set bonus. The hunt just isn't a great button for the tank iteration of this class. It leaves the tank vulnerable and doesn't make any significant impact on damage or survivability. The hunt feels like a raid talent or single target ability, yet most if not all of the other tank 4 set bonuses impact their AoE more than anything else. I don't know what they could change here, but it would be nice if it reset Immolation Aura, for example, and let it stack or something. I don't know, I'm not a Demon Hunter main. And this tier set is the reason why. I've tested Paladin quite a bit, and I hate talking about it because everyone wants this class to burn in hell for Season 1. This class has been catching nerf after nerf. First, it was a small nerf to Refining Fire, followed by another nerf to Refining Fire, accompanied with a few more defensive nerfs on some talents like Uther's Counsel and Strength in Adversity. Some could argue that this class benefits even more from cooldown reduction now since their new tier set exists. My counter argument to that is that the tier set, first of all, has a low proc rate and feels pretty unreliable. Next, the tier set does require you to spend an outrageous amount of holy power to keep the buff extending, but depending on when it procs, you may not have access to copious amounts of resources. For example, if you don't have wings active or you don't have divine toll. Next, the refunds are extremely goofy to play around. Since Shield of the Righteous is off the global, you are often playing an extremely fast cadence of spells, which requires insane reaction to notice how much was refunded on each cast while you are preparing to generate holy power. This leads to easy overcapping of resources. Unlike the Vengeance Demon Hunter, who it will instantly consume their soul fragments if they ever go over cap, the Paladin only loses in this situation. It's also silly to ever sit and wait and not optimize every global because of the refund. All in all, this class feels fairly weak compared to its Season 1 counterpart, which can be a good thing. It's still viable to play. While I do want a fresh new meta for Season 2, I don't want this class to be completely destroyed because of how they were in Season 1. It's not really fair to the people who are true Paladin mains and just enjoy the class. I was able to test a bit last week in some of the legacy dungeons and it feels fine. Your group will still benefit from your utility kit and it doesn't feel broken or make a key free just because you lock in the pink class. I can't really see this class being nerfed any more than it has been already since it now feels slightly behind in damage even when playing Templar. Its kit just doesn't feel impactful anymore, though it's never going to be taken for granted. I would be surprised if this ends up being the closest version to the final release. It's fun, but it feels like a shell of what it was last season. I've been playing Blood at Night way more frequently in recent weeks. Sand Lane has just been extremely enjoyable. While I didn't test in the first 2 weeks on the public test realm, I was able to jump into a few dungeons this last weekend, and oh boy, let me tell you, Blood Death Knight is not looking bad. While my versatility was quite low, I still felt extremely sturdy due to the tier set causing Death Strike to cleave. It just feels like a significant bolster to my blood shield performance, which helps mitigate a lot of that upfront physical damage from auto attacks, allowing my death strikes to recover my health bar from those large hits. Things like Ironheart and Bloodshot also contribute to this. Also, the damage of Sand Lane feels quite high in large pulls. This is generally expected, but can still boil down to RNG. But between Blood Beast procs, high dot damage, Blood Boil AoE, and Death Strike cleaves, this class can actually pack a punch. While the tier set feels borderline useless in single target encounters, it's not something you necessarily care for. Dancing Rune Weapon alone can carry a bit of weight, but Icebound Fortitude, Rune Tap, and AMS can fill those gaps defensively. I might be coping a little bit here, but Death Knight is looking quite strong despite a lackluster tier set. I guess my biggest concern before testing was how their tier set had very little interaction with the class, while something like VDH was getting a true meta. But since a lot of these sets are getting changed to be pretty mediocre defensively, it's nice to gain a pretty sizable and useful effect from the 2 and 4 set in Deathstrike Cleaves and increased damage from Luck of the Draw buff. If you're looking for any Guardian Druid information, this probably isn't the best place. I'm not super sold on Guardian Druid right now, either from a tier set perspective nor a playstyle perspective. Both hero talents to me make the class feel clunky, and I just can't really find enjoyment playing my once main specialization. The first week I jumped onto PTR, the tier set was causing bears to shift out of bear form whenever the tier set procced, and ever since I never really logged back in, until writing the script for this video and realizing how stupid it would be not to test it at least once or twice. Guardian Druid actually has seen a fair bit of changes, and a lot of this comes from a newly designed class tree. I'm not going to go into every detail here, but the tree generally has better pathing, and we've seen some new talents added like Symbiotic Relations and Circle of the Wild, along with new passives like Asenia's Renewal. I would imagine Guardian Druids are eating somewhat well with this new tree. Ursaw's Warding was also a new talent in the Spec tree that grants them magical damage reduction based on their armor. The wording of this ability is a little bit off, because it actually translates to up to a 10% damage reduction, which translates 1% per stack up to 10. Hitting 10% seems to be near impossible without Incarnation, but it's very easy to maintain between 5 and 8 at all times. The new tier set is also extremely uninspired. You won't really notice the random procs of the other spells unless you're looking at something like Details. Through my testing, I was playing Druid of the Claw as well because I just really prefer the playstyle over Loon's Chosen. Like I said, it's not bad, but it's uninspired. To me, it hasn't changed. Well, that just about sums it up. I don't really have anything else I want to say for this video. I've been getting asked a fair bit which tank feels the strongest, or at least more enjoyable. As a diehard Brewmaster main, Brewmaster is still my go-to answer for this, but I have been having an absolute blast playing Blood Death Knight, and as much as it may surprise people, Protection Warrior, despite all the negatively received changes. The only thing I want to say is that if you are beginning to think of what to main next season, take all of the information in this video and other videos with a grain of salt. There is still plenty of time for Blizzard to make changes, whether it's through buffs or nerfs. Well, let me know if you have any questions down below, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.